25-pounder is the new field artillery gun. Here it is limbered up to its towing vehicle, which is known as a quad. The gun is now being unlimbered. The 25-pounder replaces the 18-pounder and the 4.5-inch howitzer. It fires a shell weighing 25 pounds for a maximum range of 13,400 yards with supercharge. Let's take a look at each part of the gun. Here is the basic structure. It consists of a trail, axle tree, and wheels. The carriage rests on 3 points in action. A spade is fitted to the rear end of the trail to prevent backward movement on firing. Just above the spade is the trail eye, which is for attaching the carriage to the trailer. At the front end of the trail is the axle, and at either end are wheels with low-pressure pneumatic tires. These should be kept at a pressure of 40 pounds per square inch. By the way, the gun can be fired even if there is a flat tire. At the side, here, there's a lever which works the brakes. These are of the internally expanding type. Underneath the trail and at the sides, there are brackets for attaching the firing platform. Here it is in the traveling position. The trail is humpbacked to give clearance underneath for the platform. Now it's in the firing position. It is connected by stays to the trail. The advantage of having a platform is that it gives quick all-round traverse to the gun. The spade is now masked by the spade box, which prevents the spade sinking into the ground when the platform is being used. The gun can, of course, be fired without the platform, in which case the spade is left unmasked. Let's deal now with the superstructure. The first part is the saddle, which supports the cradle and gun. On top of the trail, there are 2 phosphor bronze bearing strips on which the saddle rests. At the front, there is a bearing for its pivot, and there are 2 guides which are engaged by clips on the saddle. These hold the saddle down at the rear end. Here it is in position. Its main job is to allow the gun and cradle to be traversed on top of the trail. This is done by the traversing gear, which gives a movement of 4 degrees on either side of the central line. The next part of the superstructure is the cradle, which holds the gun and recoil mechanism. It's now in position. The purpose of the cradle is to give elevation to the gun and guide the recoiling part. At the rear end, there's an elevating arc. This engages with the pinion of the elevating gear, which is fixed to the saddle. The cradle is now being elevated. The maximum elevation is 40 degrees. Now it's being depressed to its maximum depression of 5 degrees. To prevent strain on the elevating gear when the gun is traveling, the cradle is secured to the trail by the cradle clamp. Here it is in position. For firing, the clamp is folded back against the left side of the trail, where it's held by its catch. The next component is the recoil system. Here it is in the cradle. On the left side of the saddle here goes the sighting system. It's used when laying the gun for line and elevation. We'll tell you more about the recoil system and sights later. On top of the recoil system are 2 projections. These carry the piece, which is the name given to the part of the gun which actually fires the shell. There are two tubes, a loose barrel, and a jacket. The loose barrel can be easily removed from the jacket, so that when it's worn out, it can be replaced by a new one. But remember, numbers 1, that in any case, you must take out your loose barrel once every 3 months for cleaning and oiling. Let's see how this is done in detail. The gun is laid horizontal, and as we're going to alter the position of the center of gravity, the elevating hand wheel is lashed. This will prevent the gun elevating of its own accord. The brakes are put on to prevent any movement of the carriage. The breech mechanism is now dismantled. As before the loose barrel can be removed from the jacket, the breech ring must be unscrewed. This is not possible unless the breech block and other parts of the breech mechanism are dismantled. The securing screw of the breech ring having been unscrewed, the breech ring is removed. The breech ring is attached to the jacket by interrupted threads. Here is the hole for the securing screw. The sealing collar is now unscrewed. The two Ferrodo packing rings inside the collar prevent moisture getting in between the barrel and jacket. The number 86 tool is placed in the muzzle and the barrel is tapped to the rear. Now, numbers 1, another point is that you must never take out your loose barrel when dust or sand is blowing about, or in a damp atmosphere, as the outside bearing surface of the barrel and the inside of the jacket must be kept scrupulously clean and free from moisture. The new barrel is now inserted. Here it is, half into the jacket. It's important that the outside of the barrel is lightly covered with oil C70, and it must not be touched with the hands. On no account must grease be allowed on the barrel or in the jacket, as this would fill up the clearance between the two and prevent proper seating of the barrel. Tool number 85 this time is placed in the chamber end and the barrel finally tapped home. Graphite grease is smeared on the threads of the jacket. This stops them from rusting, so don't spare the grease. Incidentally, when you take out your loose barrel for its 3 monthly cleaning, all the old graphite grease must be wiped off and the threads cleaned with paraffin if necessary. Graphite grease is also applied to the sealing collar threads. This will prevent moisture getting in and rusting the threads on the front end of the jacket. Remember, the grease only goes on the threads and not on the Ferrodo rings. The breech ring and sealing collar are now replaced. The securing screw of the breech ring is tightened and graphite grease smeared round the front of the breech ring. This will prevent moisture from getting in between the breech ring and jacket. Finally, the breech mechanism has to be assembled. You'll learn all about the working of it later. The only remaining part of the equipment is the shield, which is now being placed in position. It's bolted to the front end of the trail. It provides protection for the gun detachment. The flap can be lowered for traveling. At the left side there is a port which can be opened for direct laying against tanks. Now we're going to describe the breech mechanism of the 25-pounder and show you how it works. It's of the vertical sliding block type. This means that the breech end of the gun is closed by a rectangular block which moves up and down in guides in the breech ring. The block is operated by this lever on the right side of the breech wing. It's known as the lever breech mechanism, or LBM. The LBM is keyed to a horizontal shaft which passes through the breech wing. Keyed to this shaft also, there's a crank. This has two rollers at its outer end. These rollers travel in an inclined groove in the block. You'll see it better in this diagram. As the shaft is rotated by the LBM, the breech opens and closes. To limit and cushion the downward movement of the block, we have this spring and plunger, known as the breech block buffer. As the block moves down to the open position, the toe on the LBM comes into contact with the buffer and prevents any further downward movement. Now let's close the breech again. Let's close it again, but on the diagram this time. In the closed position, we must prevent it from being opened accidentally. The block is now in the fully closed position, but the crank is not fully home. During the last movement of the crank, the rollers come out of contact with the path in the block, and the flat on the crank just behind the rollers comes into contact. The crank in this way acts as a strut and supports the block in the closed position. In the closed position, the movement of the LBM is limited by the buffer casing. It's also limited by the crank coming up against a face on the breech ring. When the LBM reaches the closed position, the catch on the handle engages with the stud on the side of the breech ring. This prevents any movement of the LBM unless the catch is released by hand. And now let's see how the empty cartridge case is extracted once the gun has fired. For this we have extractors. These pivot loosely on the actuating shaft, one on either side of the breech opening. They're operated by the breech block during its opening movement. Watch this happening on a simple diagram. The shaped surface on the front of the block forces the toe of the extractor forward. Now look again. As the breech block comes to the fully open position, the lips of the extractors lever the cartridge case from the chamber and throw it clear of the gun. Another job of the extractors is to hold the block in the loading position. The breech block buffer, which we showed you before, not only cushions the fall of the block, but forces it upwards slightly. Watch this happening on the diagram. The spring forces the block upwards until the hooks on the extractors engage with the projections on the front surface of the block. This holds the block in the loading position. When a fresh round is loaded, the rim of the cartridge case